Every morning he found himself standing on the same platform, heart heavy with the echoes of what could have been. The rails stretched ahead like his regrets, each tie a memory he wished he could change. He had once been confident, filled with ambition, ready to conquer the world. But one single choice had derailed him, leaving him frozen in shame while life moved forward without him. Each passing train became a reminder that time did not wait, that every second wasted in regret was a moment he could never reclaim. On that quiet platform, he felt the weight of his past mistakes like a physical burden pressing on his chest. He remembered the day everything fell apart. He had sat across a table, hands trembling, words tripping from his lips as he watched trust crumble between him and the people he loved. He had promised more than he could deliver, risked everything on a gamble that failed spectacularly. The fallout was swift. Friendships fractured, opportunities vanished, and self-respect slipped through his fingers like sand. Since then, he had become a ghost to himself, haunted by every misstep, every harsh word spoken in panic. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of crimson and gold, an old man shuffled onto the platform and took a seat beside him. His clothes were simple, his hands worn by decades of labor, but his eyes held a warmth that felt strangely familiar. The stranger pulled out a small, weathered notebook and began to write, seemingly oblivious to the world. Curiosity flickered in the young man's heart, but pride held his tongue. He stared ahead at the darkening tracks, unwilling to share the burden he carried. After a long silence, the old man closed his notebook and looked over, offering a gentle nod. The young man glanced sideways, surprised by the kindness in those eyes. Without a word, the stranger tapped the cover of his notebook, then pointed to the young man's chest, as if inviting him to share the ache inside. At first, the young man recoiled. He was a stranger, a perfect audience for his shame but dangerously close to judgment. Still, something in the old man's posture said he understood sorrow, and with a shaky breath he began to speak. He spoke of failure, of promises broken, of the nights spent staring at the ceiling while regret replayed every misstep in an endless loop. He confessed his fear that he was destined to live in the shadow of that one catastrophe, that he would never prove his worth again. The words tumbled out, raw and guilt-laden, and with each confession, the burden on his shoulders seemed to shift. When he finally paused, exhausted by the weight of his own truth, the old man smiled. He opened his notebook to a page filled with careful handwriting. The entry, dated 20 years before, described a seamstress who had taken a risk on her own business only to watch it collapse in the first year. Orders vanished, bills accumulated, and she had to sell her beloved sewing machine just to keep food on the table. She could have given up, convinced herself she was a failure destined to repeat her mistakes. But instead she focused on the lessons hidden in her ruin: how to manage money, how to find resilient suppliers, how to adapt when the world shifted beneath her feet. She rebuilt, slowly and deliberately, until her business thrived beyond her wildest dreams. The old man closed the notebook and turned back to the young man. "You carry your mistakes like stones," he said softly. "Each one weighs you down until you cannot move. But mistakes are not meant to hold you back. They are the raw material of your growth. If you learn their lessons, if you use them to carve a sturdier foundation, then your past becomes an ally, not an enemy." For the first time, the young man considered his regrets as resources. He thought about everything he had endured, the betrayal he felt when trust shattered, the humiliating conversations where he begged for forgiveness, the long nights of solitude. Each memory stung, but beneath the pain lay understanding of how trust is earned, of how words can wound, of how perseverance springs from the darkest moments. He realized that he had been trying to bury those memories to pretend they never happened, but in doing so he had buried the very insights he needed to move forward. He asked the old man how he had learned to let go of resentment toward himself. The stranger's eyes softened. Every morning, he said, he writes one line in his notebook about the mistake he made and the lesson he took from it. He never writes the same mistake twice. Some days it takes him 10 pages to unpack the lesson. Other days, a single sentence suffices. The ritual reminds him that he is not his failures. He is the sum of every lesson he's ever learned. By acknowledging the past, he turns it into an engine that drives him onward. That night, the young man returned home and found an old journal. He dusted it off, opened it to a blank page, and picked up a pen. His hand trembled as he wrote down the mistake that had defined him for so long. Then beneath it, he wrote the lesson he gleaned. Communication is not just about speaking. It is about listening and understanding the needs of others. He paused, reading the lines as if they were a lifeline thrown across chasms of doubt. With each word, he felt the heavy stones in his chest begin to roll away. Over the next weeks, he continued the practice. He wrote about how he had doubted himself before taking that ill-fated risk, how fear had silenced his intuition. He reflected on how he could have asked for help, how openness might have steered him onto a different path. He acknowledged the bruises he carried and then scribbled the strategies he could use next time. Humility in asking for advice, patience in waiting for results, courage in admitting mistakes early. At first, the pages were stained with tears, heavy with regret. But as the entries multiplied, they grew fuller with hope, determination, and insight. One evening, he found himself again on the platform, but this time he was not alone with his regrets. The platform teemed with life. People rushing home from work, friends laughing, lovers meeting for coffee. He realized that life moved forward, everyone carrying their own burdens, their own untold stories of mistakes and triumphs. Yet each person was more than the worst choices they had ever made. They were a tapestry of choices, and the mistakes were just threads woven through the larger pattern of their lives. A train arrived with a rush of air and a screech of brakes. He boarded, finding an empty seat by the window. As the train pulled away, the city lights blurred into streaks of luminescence, and he closed his eyes. He revisited his entries in his mind, the words glinting like half-forgotten promises. He saw how far he had come, no longer the man frozen by shame, but someone forging strength from every fault. The train carried him forward, but it was he who had found the power to move. On his way home, he stopped by a small cafe where, weeks earlier, he had spilled coffee in his nervousness and fled in embarrassment. He sat at the same table and ordered a cup. As he waited, he felt something new stirring inside him, compassion for himself. He no longer saw that moment as a humiliating failure, but as a sign he cared deeply. The spilt coffee was a reminder that vulnerability is part of being human. He thought about the old man on the platform and wondered if he would ever see him again. He took out his notebook, added a final line, gratitude for the stranger who showed him how to turn his mistakes into stepping stones. He folded the page and tucked the notebook into his coat pocket, a symbol of the journey from regret to resilience. Months passed and life continued its unpredictable course. He started mentoring a friend who felt trapped by her own errors. He listened without judgment, guiding her through the same process, naming her mistake, finding its lesson, letting it fuel her growth. He shared his own entries, not as proof of perfection but as evidence that transformation was possible. In helping someone else, he felt his own story take on new meaning. On another cool evening, he returned to the platform one last time. It had become a place of memory, a crossroads where he met his past and chose a new direction. He sat on the same bench, closed his eyes, and breathed deeply. He could feel the pulse of life all around him, the footsteps, the distant horns, the hum of conversation. He no longer felt isolated by his mistakes. He felt connected to the great human tapestry of stumbles and recoveries. The next train thundered in, doors sliding open. He rose, stepping inside with quiet confidence. He took a seat, placed his notebook on his lap, and looked ahead. The tracks stretched forward, promising new destinations. He smiled, understanding that the journey of letting go never truly ends. There will always be mistakes to learn from, moments to forgive, and lessons to harvest. But now, he carried within him the knowledge that his past was not a cell but a classroom, that every misstep could become a stepping stone toward a richer life. As the train sped into the night, he opened his notebook and wrote 4 simple words. I am enough already. In one. That moment he felt free.